These are the worked out solutions for the test for Algebra A, Test 3, Quarter 1. So let's take a look at the first problem here. So what we want to do is isolate the variable, but before we can do that, we need to collect some like terms. So I'm going to take the negative 4u and the positive 2u and combine them together as one term. So what I'm left with is a 7 equals negative 7 minus 2u. So notice how we have more negatives than positives, so that's why it was a negative. We subtracted because they were opposite in sign. So from this point, I'm ready to isolate the variable by moving the constant over to the left-hand side of the equal sign. That leaves me with a positive 14 equals negative 2u. Make sure you bring down that minus sign. It's a common error people will end up making. So from this point, I'm going to divide by that negative 2, and that will have the u term being all by itself, which leads me to negative 7 as the solution. Let's take a look at our next one. We're going to collect some like terms. Negative 3x and minus x, they're the same sign, so you end up adding the two numbers together. Negative 4x is what we get there, plus 8 all equals negative 12. So from this point, we will move the 8 over by subtracting it from both sides. Notice how we have the same sign here, so we go ahead and add those two numbers. We have negative 20 equals negative 4x. So the next step is to divide by negative 4. That will cancel out the negative signs in front of the two terms there, so we're left with x equals positive 5. Well, the next problem, I'll want to isolate the variable, but before I do that, I need to multiply by 5 over the c and the minus 2. That's the distributive property. So what I've got left is a 5c minus 10, and all equals negative 12. So from there, I'll do an opposite operation. I'm going to add 10 to both sides. Notice how they're opposite in sign, so I end up having to subtract those two numbers. I get negative 2 equals 5c. Well, when I do the division, 5 doesn't go into 2 evenly, so I'll leave the answer as a fraction since it's reduced. So my answer there is negative 2/5 equals c. Next problem, we have to use that distributive property, and so we're left with 3a plus 3 minus 4 equals 5. Make sure you distribute the 3 over both terms. From here, we can go ahead and collect some like terms. So notice how they're opposite in sign, so I end up subtracting those two numbers. So I'm left with 3a minus 1 equals 5. So from there, I'll go ahead and do an opposite operation. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So when I add 1, I still have the 3a on the left-hand side, but now equals 6. So now I'm ready to divide by 3 on both sides, and that's how I'm getting 2 as the value of a. And our next one, a little bit more cumbersome here because we have to distribute this negative 3 over that addition. And so I bring down the 4x, but now it's going to be a minus 18. And here's the catch. You got to really watch the sign on this next term. It's a minus 3x. Negative times a positive makes a negative. I brought down the negative 1, the equal sign of the 2. Now I'm ready to collect some like terms. I got 4x minus 3x, which just leaves me with x. But then I can also combine these two terms. Negative 18 minus 1 makes a negative 19. They're the same sign, so I had to add those two numbers. Now I'm ready to do some opposite operations. I'm going to end up just adding 19 to both sides, and we'll have the answer. So x equals 21. Next problem, it's a multi-step equation, variables on both sides. So first step, I'm going to go ahead and add the 17 to both sides. So when I do that, that leaves me with the 7a equals 4a plus 18. Now I need to move the variables all to the left-hand side. You always move constants to one side, variables to the opposite side. So I went ahead and subtracted the 4a from both sides, and it left me with 3a equals 18. So from this point, I just have the one final step. I'm going to end up dividing by 3 on both sides. That gives me A equals 6. Those are the first 6 problems. Let's take a look at the next 3 problems. So go ahead and switch the screen here, and we have another problem that involves moving some terms from one side to the other. So I'm going to go ahead and add the 2 to both sides. So that leaves me with 4x on the left-hand side equals 3x plus 6. So when I go ahead and subtract the 3x from both sides, see how it isolates the variable on one side of the equal sign. So I have just x equals 6, and that's the answer I'm looking for. Next one involves the distributive property first. I can do it at one time, both sides of the equal sign at once. So I'm left with 2x plus 8. So 2 times x, 2 times 4. On the other side, I have 3x minus 6. So now I'm ready to solve. This time I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 2x from both sides. Do that first, and I'm left with an 8 equals x minus 6. So from this point, I'll just have to add the 6 to both sides. And this way I get the variable by itself. So I've got x equals 14. That's the answer. Next problem, we are asked to, it says a chair costs $775. So this is like a total cost right here. So let's see what else they say. You saved $350. That's what you start with. So that's your constant. That's what we have to we started with. And each week you add $25 to your savings. So this is the variable amount. And what the unknown is, we just don't know how many times or how many weeks we ended up saving. So let's see what it says. After how many weeks will it take you to save enough money to buy the chair? After how many weeks? This is the unknown. So that's our variable right there. When it says each week, that tells us that we might have a variable amount. And sure enough, we do, because the question is how many weeks. So whatever the question is where the variable goes. If you see a number, like 25 here, it's attached to each week we add $25. That means that's where our variable amount goes. So we'll start with the 350 plus 25W equals 775. So when we go ahead and solve this, we're just going to subtract that 350 from both sides. And when we do that, we're left with a 25W equals, this makes 5, 2, and a 4. So we go ahead and do some division here, dividing by 25 on both sides. And when I do this, I think of how many quarters makes $4.25. Well, 4 times 4, $4 times 4 quarters makes 16 quarters, makes $4, plus 1 extra quarter for the 25 cents would be 17 quarters. So 17 weeks is the answer. Whenever I divide by 5, I always think of quarters. Well, those are the problems you'll see on this week's test. This is the practice test for Test 3, Quarter 1 for Algebra A.